There were a lot of nervous noises in the Galactic Council chamber. Hundreds of alien delegates sat in their floating seats, and their voices mixed together to make a worried buzz. The big dome above them showed the stars outside, but no one was looking up. Everyone was focused on the tiny bug-like shape in the middle of the room. Under the bright lights, Delegate Vorix of the Varani people looked small and weak. He was standing there and his body shook a little. His big compound eyes, which usually sparkled with beautiful colors, now looked dull and wet. Everyone could see that he was scared. "Please," Vorix said, and his thin neck held a translation device that made his voice sound clearer. The device made a crackling sound as if it was having trouble with the emotion in his voice. "Someone has to help us, please. Varan 7 is where we live. There are 3 million people who live there. Kids, families, elders who have never been in a war." He stopped and looked around at all the strange alien faces that were looking back at him. Some had tentacles. Some had scales on them. Some of them didn't even have faces that people would know. But none of them seemed like they wanted to help. "The Kresh fleet is coming," Vorix said, his voice getting softer. "They will be here in 2 weeks. Maybe not as much. We don't have any weapons. No troops. There's no way to fight them. We tried to leave on our own, but we don't have enough ships. We need help. We need someone to keep the evacuation safe. Please." The room went quiet. It was a heavy silence, like a weight on everyone's shoulders. Vorix stood there waiting and hoping. The delegates started to answer one by one. The first person to speak was the Thorian. His kind looked like crystals that walked, and his voice sounded like wind chimes. He said, "The Thorian Empire regrets that we can't help," but he didn't sound very sorry at all. "The Kresh are too strong. We can't put our ships at risk." Next, the Pelian delegate spoke. Her blue skin was twitching with nerves. "Pelian space is too far away. We weren't able to get there on time." "We're sorry." Another voice. "The risk is too high." Another one. "This isn't our area." One more. "We need to protect our own people." Every time Vorix said no, his antennae drooped lower. His people were going to die, but no one would help them. The Kresh never took prisoners. They didn't talk it over. They just came and ruined everything. Everyone on the council knew this, but they were too scared to speak up. The Varani delegate looked like he was going to pass out. His legs were shaking. He had come here as a last chance, and that chance was dying right in front of him. Then a voice came from the back of the room. It wasn't loud, but it somehow got through all the noise and excuses. It was quiet, steady. "People, I have a question." People looked. Tentacles twisted. Eyes of all colors turned to look at the human part of the council. James Miller, the ambassador from Earth, stood up slowly. He was tall for a human, with gray hair and a face that had seen a lot of years. He wore a plain, dark suit. Compared to some of the other delegates who wore glowing robes and crowns that floated, he didn't look like much. But the way he stood was different. Something real. Unbreakable. "How many ships do you have for transport?" Miller asked Vorix straight out. He spoke in a relaxed way as if he were asking about the weather. Suddenly Vorix's antennae perked up. There was a small glimmer of hope in his eyes. We have 47 ships for transport. But Ambassador Miller, the Kresh will have a fleet of ships to blockade. 20 or more warships. They will sink any ship that tries to leave. They would never get past the Kresh guns, even if we had 1,000 transports." Miller nodded slowly as if he were thinking about it. Other delegates in the room watched with interest. Some were worried. The people were hard to predict. That was common knowledge. The galaxy called Earth a death world, which means it was so dangerous that it was amazing that anything could live there. And it was just as hard to predict what the people from that world would do. Miller simply said, "The blockade. Is that your problem?" "Yes," Vorix said, and his hope began to fade again. "We can't get past a Kresh blockade. No one can." For a moment Miller was quiet. After that he smiled. The smile wasn't very big. There was only a little bit at the corner of his mouth. But there was something about it that made a few delegates shift uncomfortably in their seats. Miller said in a calm voice, "Get your people to the landing zones. Take what they can carry. Food, water, and medicine. Get those 47 transports fueled up and ready to go. Keep them on the ground until we tell you to." Vorix looked at him. "But the blockade?" Miller cut in and his voice was stronger this time. "Sure. We'll take care of the blockade. The Marines are coming from Earth." There was a lot of noise in the chamber. The air was full of shocked clicks, whistles, and chirps. The crystalline Thorian delegate really did sound like glass breaking. The Pelian representative's skin turned bright red with shock. Someone said in their own language, The humans are crazy, but the translation devices picked it up anyway. Another voice said, they'll be destroyed. Deathworlders, someone else said quietly, and the word spread through the room like wildfire. Vorax didn't care about any of that though. Now his antennae were straight up. His eyes were bright once more. Someone had agreed. Someone was really going to help his people. You really will come? Vorax asked, his voice shaking, but this time it wasn't from fear. Miller looked at him with a kind but very firm look on his face. We're already on our way. We heard about your situation 3 days ago, and our fleet left Earth's orbit. In 5 days they will be there. The room was quiet again, but this time it was a different kind of quiet. There was a silence of disbelief. The Thorian delegate spoke up. Ambassador Miller, the Kresh fleet has 20 warships. How many ships is Earth sending? Miller looked at his data pad. 3 destroyers. 600 Marines. That should be enough. Now there was no sound at all. 3 ships against 20. It was a suicide. But Miller was already sitting back down and sending messages on his pad. He thought the issue was settled. Earth had made its decision. Vorax stood in the middle of the room, and for the first time in weeks, he didn't feel hopeless terror. He had hope. The people from Deathworld were coming. His people might really make it through this. As the council meeting came to an end and the delegates left, still muttering in shock and disbelief, Vorax walked over to the human section. Miller was getting his things together so he could leave. Ambassador, Vorax said in a low voice. Why? Why would your people put themselves in danger for us? We don't have anything to give Earth. We hardly know each other. Miller stopped and looked at the little alien in front of him. He then put a hand on Vorax's shoulder, but only lightly because humans were strong and he didn't want to hurt him. Because someone asked for help, Miller said simply. And because it's the right thing to do. That's a good enough reason. Then he left, leaving Vorax there with tears running down his face. Not tears of sadness this time. Tears of thanks. People were coming. The Kresh had no idea what was coming their way. Captain Rachel Stone stood on the USS Valiant's bridge, staring at the bright tactical display in front of her. The screen showed everything. Her 3 destroyers were blue dots and the Kresh blockade fleet was a wall of red dots. 20 ships of war. 20-3. Rachel didn't care about math anymore, even though the math wasn't good. She had served in the Navy for 15 years. Fought in the outer colonies. Fought pirates close to the moons of Jupiter. But this was not the same. It wasn't about land or resources. There were 3 million people on that planet who were going to die, and it was her job to make sure that didn't happen. Captain, we're getting close to the blockade perimeter, Lieutenant Kevin Walsh said from the navigation station. She could hear the stress in his voice even though it was calm. Everyone on the bridge knew where they were going. Ashley Brooks, a young woman who was the tactical officer, cleared her throat. Captain, I see 22 Kresh ships now. Sensors just picked up 2 more. They're getting together to make a wall around the planet. Rachel slowly nodded. 22. Even better. She thought about it while tapping her fingers on the armrest of her command chair. The Kresh were good at fighting. Their ships were strong, their weapons hit hard, and they weren't easily scared. In the last 10 years they had taken over 12 star systems. They were used to winning. But they had never fought people before. Anything from the Kresh in terms of communication? Rachel asked. Derek Chin, the communications officer, put his hand on his earpiece. Yes, ma'am. They are now calling us. Only audio. He stopped and listened. They're telling us to turn around right now or they'll shoot. Rachel almost smiled. Not quite. Put them on speaker. There was a loud, angry voice on the bridge. The translator software made it sound like English, but it still sounded mean and aggressive. Human vessels, this is Kresh Battle Commander Throck. You are going into a military area that is off limits. Now turn your ships around or we will kill you. This is your last warning. The crew on the bridge looked at Rachel and waited for her to answer. A few of them seemed nervous. Some of them looked happy. Everyone was waiting to see what she would do. Rachel leaned back in her chair and spoke clearly. Communications, send this back to them. Let them know that we're coming through no matter what. Tell them to move or we'll move them. Derek didn't seem sure. Captain, are you sure? Send it, Rachel said in a strong voice. Derek swallowed hard and sent the message. The Kresh commander's voice came back a few seconds later, and this time it was angrier. You have made a big mistake, humans. We will break your ships. Rachel got up from her chair. She walked to the front of the bridge and looked at the view screen which showed the stars ahead. There was a planet full of scared people who needed help somewhere beyond those Kresh ships. That was all that was important. She said on the ship-wide comm, All hands, battle stations. Not a drill. We're going in hot. The ship's alarms started going off. There were red lights flashing. The crew members ran to their places. Chief Williams was already pushing the reactors to full power down in engineering. Dr. Patricia Hayes was getting ready for injuries in the medical bay. 300 Marines were getting into their drop pods in the hangar bay and checking their weapons one last time. Rachel looked at her bridge crew. Okay everyone, this is what we're going to do. No tricks. No smart moves. We're going to go straight through their formation at full speed. They won't see it coming because it's so crazy. That's the point. Ashley Brooks looked up from her desk with wide eyes. Captain, the most burn is 8 GS. That's enough to hurt most of the crew. The crush can't handle more than 4. Rachel said, I know. But we can. That's what makes us better. Helm, get ready for an 8G burn. Medical, check to see that everyone is in their crash harnesses. Anyone who isn't strapped in is going to have a very bad day. Kevin Walsh's hands moved over the controls. Course plotted, Captain. Right through the middle of their formation. Rachel told all the ships to form up on us. Valiant leads. On my mark, the military will be at its strongest. The Defiant and the Relentless, the other 2 destroyers, moved behind her ship. 3 ships against 22. It should have scared Rachel, but she felt strangely calm. This was what they had practiced for. People were best at this, charging headfirst into impossible situations and somehow getting out the other side. Ashley said, they're charging up weapons. Locks on more than one target. They're about to shoot at us. Rachel said, let them lock up as much as they want. Helm, do the most damage. No. The ship moved forward as if a giant had kicked it. The acceleration pushed everyone back into their seats with a lot of force. 8 times the force of Earth's gravity. Rachel felt like an elephant was on her chest. It was hard to breathe. It was almost impossible to move. She did, however, keep her eyes on the screen. The 3 human ships sped up faster than anything the crush had ever seen. At one point they were moving slowly toward them. In the next moment they were screaming forward like missiles. The crush fleet didn't have much time to respond. Ashley grunted, they're trying to change their formation, as the acceleration made it hard for her to speak. Not fast enough. We're going right through them. The crush ships looked bigger and bigger on the view screen. Rachel could see their weapons charging and how they were trying to turn to follow the human ships. But the people were going too fast. 8 GS of acceleration pushed them through the blockade line like a bullet through paper. Gunfire lit up the area around them. Green plasma bolts and red laser beams shot past the hull. Some hit, which made the ship shake and rattle, but the shields stayed up. The crush were shooting at ghosts in an attempt to hit ships that had already passed them. We're done. Kevin yelled. We're through their line. As they passed the blockade, the crushing speed slowed down. Rachel took a deep breath and her lungs were happy for the break. The bridge crew around her was gasping and checking their stations. Rachel said, send me the damage report. Ashley said, shields at 70%. Minor damage to the hull on decks 4 and 7. No one was hurt. Defiant says it got the same damage. Relentless took a bigger hit, but they are still in business. Rachel smiled a little bit. They had done it. They had gotten through a stronger force by being willing to take more pain than the enemy could have imagined. Ashley said, Captain, the crush fleet is trying to turn around. They're trying to chase. Rachel said, let them try. We'll have our Marines on the ground by the time they turn around. Helm, take us into orbit over the main landing area. Drop pod bay, get ready to launch. Lieutenant Jake Peterson and the rest of his squad were strapped into their drop pod in the hangar. The pod was small, barely big enough for one person in full combat gear. Jake had done this a dozen times in training but never in real life. He never knew that people were shooting at him as soon as he left the ship. He had a magazine locked to his chest with his rifle. There were green lights on his helmet display for all of his squad members. Everyone was set. Everyone knew what they needed to do. The crew chief said over the radio, 2 minutes to drop. Pods are armed and ready. Good luck hunting, Marines. Jake's heart was racing. Not out of fear. Well, maybe a little fear, but mostly out of excitement. There were 3 million people on that planet who needed help. People who everyone else in the galaxy had left to die. But not by Earth. Not by Earth. All Marines, this is Captain Stone. Rachel's voice came through every Marine's helmet. You're about to do something amazing. You're about to help 3 million people. I know it's risky. I know the chances aren't very good. But I also know that all of you chose to do this. You are the best that people have to offer. Do us proud. Aura, 300 voices shouted back at once. The alarm for the launch went off. Inside the pods, red lights blinked. 30 seconds, the head of the crew said. Jake held on to the straps of his harness. This was it. 10 seconds. 9. 8. 7. The countdown went on. Jake shut his eyes and thought about why he had joined the Marines. To help others. To make a change. To be someone who ran toward danger instead of away from it. 3. 2. 1. Go. The pod flew out of the ship like a cannonball. Jake was in the hangar 1 second, and the next he was in space falling toward the planet below. Hundreds of other pods flew through the dark around him, leaving trails of fire behind them as they hit the atmosphere. The pod began to shake. Then it began to shake. Then it seemed like everything was going to fall apart. The heat from entering the atmosphere made the outside of the pod glow white-hot. Even with the cooling systems, the temperature inside kept rising. The temperature alarm on Jake's armor went off. This was the part that killed most of the species. Most aliens wouldn't be able to survive this kind of entry. The heat, the speed, and the violent shaking were too much for their bodies to handle. But people have been riding things that tried to kill them since they first made horses. A little entry into the atmosphere wasn't going to stop them. The altimeter on the pod counted down quickly. 5,000 meters. 4,000. 3,000. The ground was coming up quickly. Very quickly. The shock absorbers went off at the very last second. Compressed air and hydraulic systems that had only one job, to keep the Marine from turning into paste. The pod hit the ground hard enough to leave a hole, but Jake was still alive, just shaken. The door blew off with powerful bolts. Jake took his rifle and rolled out, already looking for danger. For the first time, his boots touched ground that wasn't earth. Other pods were landing around him like meteors, leaving behind smoking craters. The Varani were only 100 meters away. There were hundreds, maybe even thousands, of them all staring at the Marines who had just fallen from the sky like gods of war. Jake took off his helmet so they could see his face. He wanted them to know that real people were there to help them. Not robots. Not monsters. People. United States Marine Corps, he yelled, and his voice echoed across the landing zone. We're here to take you home. For a short time no one moved. Then a small child from the Varani family ran toward him. Then another one. Then more. Jake was soon surrounded by aliens who were crying and thanking him. They all touched his armor as if they couldn't believe he was real. Jake looked up at the sky, where the Kresh fleet was still trying to figure out what had just happened. He was happy in his helmet. The Kresh had no idea what was going to happen to them. Commander Vrath of the Kresh ground forces stood in his command tent and looked at the holographic battle map that was floating in front of him. The map showed everything. His troops, the people, and the evacuation zones where the Varani civilians were gathering. He looked at it with the confidence of someone who had fought and won 100 times before. It was clear what the numbers meant. 5,000 Kresh warriors surrounded the humans. His soldiers were bigger, stronger, and better armed than almost all the other species in the galaxy. They had broken through the defenses of 12 worlds. They had made whole civilizations give up just by being there. And what about the people? There are only 600 Marines. That was all that Earth had sent. 600 soldiers trying to keep millions of civilians safe. It was almost an insult. Commander, one of his officers said as he walked up with a data pad. Our troops are ready. We are completely surrounding them. No way out. Not coming any reinforcements. Vrath slowly nodded, and his 4 eyes sparkled with pleasure. How long have they been at it? 16 hours without a break, sir. Our scouts say they don't have enough supplies. Water. Bullets. Things for healthcare. They should be worn out by now. Vrath made a noise that sounded like a laugh. 16 hours of non-stop fighting would kill any normal species. The humans had to be ready to fall apart. Send the request for surrender. Tell them that if they put down their weapons now, they can leave with the civilians. I feel like giving today. The officer seemed shocked. Sir, are you giving them terms? Why send more soldiers to a fight that's already won? Vrath waved his clawed hand dismissively and said, No. They're surrounded. They don't have enough people. They're very tired. They will give up in less than an hour. It's the right thing to do. He was wrong. Very, very wrong. Corporal Tommy Shaw crouched behind a pile of rubble that used to be someone's home at the northern barricade. There were burn marks all over his armor from plasma hits. In some places the paint was burned off. There was a hole melted all the way through one of his shoulder plates. For 3 hours his canteen had been empty. His mouth felt like it was made of sand. But the only thing that mattered was that his rifle still worked. Someone yelled, Contact front. Tommy lifted his head just high enough to see over the wall. Another group of Kresh warriors was running across the open ground toward their position. Big things at least 7 feet tall, with thick armor and weapons that could break through concrete. Tommy said, "Here we go again." He raised his gun and started shooting. 3-round bursts. Shoot for the weak spots in the armor. Don't waste bullets. Use every bullet wisely. On his left, Specialist Kate Morris was shooting as fast as she could. Because she used it so much, her rifle was very hot. She ducked behind cover, and her hands moved on their own to remove the empty magazine. She yelled, "Reloading." Tommy moved to his right without even thinking about it, blocking her line of fire. His rifle kept barking and spitting bullets at the Kresh that was charging. One fell down. Then one more. But there were always more behind them. Kate put a new magazine in her rifle and shot again right away. "Thanks, Tommy." He yelled back, "No problem," over the sound of gunfire. About 200 Varani civilians were huddled together in what was left of a building behind them. Families. Parents holding their kids. Elderly people who could hardly walk. They were all supposed to be on the next transport ship, but it wouldn't get there for another 2 hours. These 12 Marines were the only thing that stood between them and the Kresh. Tommy could hear the kids crying. Could hear parents trying to calm them down and tell them everything would be fine. He wasn't sure if it would be okay. He knew he couldn't leave until those civilians were safe. "Shaw. Morris, how much ammo do you have?" Their squad leader, Sergeant Mike Davis, was calling over the combat net. "Only 3 magazines left." Kate called back. 2.5 here, Sarge." Tommy said more. "Make them count. The next supply drop isn't for an hour." Davis's voice was rough and hoarse from yelling orders all night. But it was steady. Come. Like they were training instead of fighting for their lives. The Kresh wave hit them hard. Plasma bolts sizzled through the air and hit the barricade, melting pieces of it. Tommy could feel the heat from one bolt through his armor. Private Jeff Cooper, another Marine, got shot in the leg and fell with a scream. "Medic," someone yelled. But there wasn't time for medics right now. The Kresh were almost on top of them. Tommy kept shooting. His rifle was so hot that it was burning his hands even though he was wearing gloves. The recoil made his shoulder hurt. The sweat and smoke made his eyes hurt. But he kept shooting. The Kresh warriors yelled their war cries, hoping that the humans would run away. That's what everyone else did too. People ran when the Kresh charged. It was easy. It had always worked. But the Marines didn't run away. "Don't back down," Davis screamed. "We're not leaving until they're on those ships. Do you hear me, Marines?" "Yay." All 12 Marines at the barricade answered, even Jeff Cooper, who was lying on the ground holding his hurt leg. It sounded like a defiant battle cry in the face of impossible odds, and for a moment, it seemed to confuse the Kresh. Just long enough for the Marines to shoot them more. 3 more Kresh fell. Then there were 4 more. The charge stopped. Then they pulled back. Tommy saw them fall back and leave their dead behind. He let out a breath he didn't know he was holding. "They're pulling back." "Good," Kate said, dropping behind cover to look at her rifle. "Maybe they'll stay back this time." But Tommy knew better than that. He had been fighting the Kresh all day. They kept going. They would come back together and try again. And again. And again. Until either the Marines gave up or the Kresh ran out of troops. "Are you okay, Tommy?" Kate asked, glancing at him. "Yeah, Tommy began to speak, and that's when the plasma bolt struck him. It came from the side, a lucky shot from a Kresh sniper. The bolt hit him in the right shoulder, breaking through a weak spot in his armor. The pain came on right away and was terrible. It felt like someone had put a white-hot iron bar on his skin. Tommy grunted and let go of his gun. His right arm wasn't working properly. The whole shoulder was numb and burning at the same time. "Tommy's hit." Kate yelled. "Help. Hey, we need a doctor here." "I'm okay." Tommy said it through clenched teeth. Everyone knew that was a lie, but it didn't matter. With his left hand he picked up his rifle. It was hard for him to aim, but he could still shoot. "Medic's coming, Tommy," Kate called while still shooting at the Kresh. "Just hold on." "I'm okay," Tommy said again and raised his rifle with his left hand. "Keep firing." The other Marines were still fighting around him. Jeff Cooper leaned against the barricade and shot with one hand while holding his hurt leg with the other. Even though Private Lisa Grant had blood running down her face from a head wound, she was still calling out targets. Corporal Dan Mitchell's armor was so damaged that it was almost useless, but he kept fighting. None of them were going. They were all still fighting. Because there were people behind them who needed protection, and Marines never left anyone behind. Sergeant Davis came up next to Tommy and slid into cover next to him. "Show me that shoulder." Don't worry about it, Sarge. That's an order, Shaw. Show it to me. Tommy put down his gun and let Davis look at the wound. The sergeant looked very serious. You need a real doctor. That hurts a lot. Tommy said, we don't have time for that. He grabbed his gun again. How long until the next bus? Davis looked at the display on his wrist. An hour and 40 minutes. Tommy nodded his head. Then I can last for another hour and 40 minutes. Davis stared at him for a long time before nodding. Shaw, you're a stubborn idiot. But you're my dumb, stubborn idiot. Please don't bleed out before the transport gets here. I'll do my best, Sarge. Davis went to see how the other Marines were doing. Tommy got back into position and got his gun ready. His shoulder pain was getting worse, not better. The edges of his vision were starting to get fuzzy. But he could still see well enough to shoot, and that was all that mattered. He heard one of the Verani kids crying behind him. A parent was singing something soft and sweet to try to calm the child down. Tommy thought of his own mother, who used to sing to him when he was scared as a child. He had joined the Marines to keep people like that safe. To be the one who kept scared kids safe from monsters in the dark. The monsters were real today and they were 7 feet tall and wore armor. But the work was the same. Movement front, someone yelled. Tommy held his rifle in his left hand. His shoulder hurt a lot. He didn't pay attention to it. A new group of Kresh warriors was getting ready to charge again. This time there had to be at least 100 of them. Possibly more. The Kresh commander was probably getting angry because he kept sending more and more soldiers to this one barricade in an attempt to break through. But he wouldn't get through. Not today. Not while Tommy and his team were still alive. Here they come again. Kate yelled. Let them come. Tommy yelled back. We still have a lot of bullets. That was another lie. They were running out of bullets very quickly. But the Kresh didn't have to know that. The Kresh charged, yelling their battle cries. The Marines shot their rifles, which lit up the afternoon. The Verani civilians huddled together behind 12 wounded, tired, and stubborn people who were protecting them and waiting for help. The Kresh had never fought an enemy like this one before. An enemy that wouldn't break no matter how hard you hit them. A foe that got stronger as the situation got worse. An enemy who would fight to the death to protect people they had never met before yesterday. Today was a tough day for the Kresh. They were learning what it was like to fight people. And they were learning that people didn't know how to give up. As she worked on the Verani civilian lying on the makeshift operating table in front of her, Dr. Emily Ross's hands shook. The table wasn't really a table. It was 2 cargo containers pushed together and covered with whatever clean material she could find. The hospital wasn't really a hospital either. It was a warehouse with 4 walls and half a roof that mostly stayed up straight. They had to make do with what they had, though. Emily had been working for 20 hours straight. There was blood from a dozen different species on her surgical scrubs. The blood of people was red. The blood of Verani was purple. It all blended together until her clothes looked like a terrible abstract painting. She had sore feet. Her back was hurting. Someone had poured sand into her eyes and they hurt. But she kept working because people kept getting hurt. She yelled to her medical team, I need more bandages. Someone get me another 4-bag, please. This patient is going to go into shock. Corpsman Luis Garcia came to her side with supplies. He looked just as tired as she did. This is the last bandage document, and we only have 3-4 bags left. Emily wanted to yell. Or weep. Or maybe both. But she didn't have time for it. Then we make it work. Please help me stabilize this patient so we can get them to the transport. She could hear the sounds of war outside. Gunfire. Booms. Yelling. The Marines were still fighting, keeping the Kresh at bay while the evacuation went on. Every few minutes, another transport ship would take off with more civilians on board to safety. They were so close to getting everyone out. So close. Emily could see the landing pad through the broken windows. Another vehicle was loading up, and the Verani families were getting on as quickly as they could. Parents with kids. Adults helping older people. Everyone was in a hurry because they all knew the Kresh were coming. How many more trips? Emily asked without looking up from her patient. Garcia said, this is the second to last one. Just one more and we're done. The command says 30 minutes. 30 minutes. Emily was able to work for 30 minutes. She only had to keep these people alive for another 30 minutes and then they could all leave. They could all go back home. The Verani on her table was bleeding a lot from a wound caused by shrapnel. Emily's hands moved quickly and efficiently, doing what needed to be done. She had practiced for this. Years of medical school and practice, all for times like this. She wouldn't let this patient die. Not today. She said, the bleeding has stopped. Garcia, put them on a stretcher. They have to be on that bus. Yes, ma'am. Emily sat up straight, but her back hurt. She took a look around the field hospital. 8 patients still couldn't be moved. 2 hurt badly. Not stable enough. She needed more time with them, but she didn't have any time. A young Marine private, who Emily knew as Danny Cooper, stuck his head through the door. There was dirt and carbon scoring all over his armor. Doc, how much longer? We're getting pushed back hard out there. Half an hour, Emily said. We need half an hour. Danny nodded. Ma'am, we'll give you 30 minutes. Don't worry. Then he left to fight again. Emily went to see the next patient, who was also a hurt Verani. This one had a broken leg and burns all over their chest. She could hear the battle getting closer as she worked. The blasts were now louder. Every blast made the building shake. Then there was an explosion that was unlike any other. More. Nearer. The whole building shook and part of the back wall fell down. The air was full of dust and trash. A person yelled. What was that? Garcia yelled. Emily ran to the window and peeked out. Her blood ran cold. Kresh's shock troops. She had heard of them but had never seen them. They were huge, at least 8 feet tall and maybe even taller. Their armor was twice as thick as what normal Kresh soldiers wore. Their weapons looked like they could blow a hole in a tank. And there were dozens of them moving in a straight line toward the hospital. These weren't regular troops. These were the best. The Kresh's best. And they were coming straight for them. Emily took the radio. This is Dr. Ross at the field hospital. We have Kresh shock troops on the way. I say again, shock troops are. Even with the static, Captain Stone's voice came through the radio loud and clear. All Marines, go back to the hospital. Make a defensive ring. Give them time. Emily saw Marines from all over the evacuation zone start to pull back and run toward the hospital through the window. There were more of them than them. Outgunned. But they came anyway because that's what Marines do. Lieutenant Jake Peterson was the first person to get to the hospital door. There were 11 Marines with him. 12 soldiers were able to hold off 40 elite Kresh warriors. The math was crazy. But Peterson didn't seem to care about math at all. He put his Marines at the entrance and told them to find cover and set up firing positions behind it. Walls that are broken. Containers of cargo that have been turned over. Rubble piles. Pay attention. Peterson yelled at his team. We hold this position for 30 minutes. That's it. Everyone will be fine after 30 minutes. Are you able to do that? Yes, sir, the Marines yelled back. Emily watched from inside as the Kresh shock troops got closer. They moved with mechanical precision, and their heavy steps shook the ground. They looked like they couldn't be stopped. Personal Danny Cooper was standing right at the door. He raised his rifle, looked through the scope, and then put his hands around his mouth. The speakers on the outside of his armor made his voice louder so everyone could hear him. He yelled at the Kresh that was coming up to him, Hey ugly. Yes you. The big guy in the nice armor. Come get some. Emily couldn't believe what she was hearing. He was making fun of them. Getting them mad. What was he thinking? But then she got it. He wasn't trying to make them scared. He was making sure that they paid attention to him and his team. Making sure they didn't go looking for easier targets. Bringing all that hate and firepower down on himself and his fellow Marines. The Kresh shock troops didn't say anything. They used guns to respond. A lot of plasma fire lit up the entrance. The Marines spread out, took cover and fired back. But the thick Kresh armor just bounced their bullets off. Hit the joints? Peterson yelled. The holes in the armor. The Marines changed their target. A few shots hit the Kresh and made them stumble, but they kept coming. Emily looked back at her patients. Garcia. We have to move everyone who can be moved. Get them to the landing pad right now. Her doctors and nurses rushed to follow orders. They grabbed stretchers, helped the wounded get up, and began to evacuate the hospital. Emily stayed behind with the patients who were too sick to move and worked hard to make sure they were stable enough to be moved. The fight outside was getting worse. The Kresh had made it to the door. Emily could hear the sound of their heavy weapons hitting. Could feel the building move. One of the shock troops tried to push its way through the door. Private Danny Cooper grabbed a fuel canister from nearby, threw it at the Kresh warrior, and shot it while it was in the air. The explosion sent the warrior flying back and set 3 other people on fire. It wouldn't kill them through their armor, but it sure made them mad. Yeah. What did you think of that? Danny yelled. We have a lot more where that came from. The Marines were giving it their all in battle. They took grenades when their rifles ran out of bullets. When they ran out of grenades, they made makeshift bombs out of anything they could find. Emily saw 2 Marines knock down a whole part of a nearby building on top of a group of Kresh warriors, burying them under tons of rubble. It was dirty. It wasn't nice. It was horrible, desperate, and scary. But it was working. The Kresh advance had come to a halt. They were hiding now, trying to figure out what to do with these crazy people. One of the Kresh elite made the mistake of charging ahead by himself in an attempt to break through the Marine line. Lieutenant Peterson knew it was going to happen. He didn't shoot. Instead, he dropped his rifle and ran straight at the warrior. Emily let out a gasp. What was he up to? That Kresh was twice as big as him and wore armor. Peterson would be very sad. But Peterson didn't care. He hit the Kresh warrior low by tackling it around the legs. The warrior fell. 3 more Marines jumped on top of it and then 4 more. They surrounded the elite warrior like wolves would a bear. Hitting. Kicking. One Marine had found a piece of rebar and was pushing it into the armor's gaps. 7 people, all fighting with pure rage and aggression, brought down the Kresh warrior. It tried to shake them off, but they just held on tighter like they were fighting an alligator. Fix bayonets, someone yelled. Emily was shocked when the Marines put long blades on the ends of their rifles. Bayonets. Knives for fighting up close. When did war become this basic? But it worked. When the next Kresh warrior got too close, it stabbed him with a bayonet between his helmet and chest plate. It fell and purple blood flowed from the wound. The Kresh were getting scared. Emily could tell by how they moved. They thought the fight would be easy. They thought the people would run away like everyone else did. Instead, they had met an enemy that fought harder. The worst things got, something they had never seen before. Doc. Garcia called from outside. That's the last patient on board. Transport is ready to go. Emily dashed to the window. The last transport was on the pad with its engines running hot and ready to go. The doctors and nurses who were taking care of her were on board. The last of the injured people were on board. There were only Marines left. She picked up the radio. This is Dr. Ross. All patients are out. Marines back off. Marines stop fighting. Ordered Peterson. By squad. First squad covers, then second squad moves. Go. The Marines began to pull back in a planned way. They acted like they had done this 1,000 times before. Half of the team would shoot while the other half ran away. After that, they would switch, jumping toward the transport while firing non-stop. Emily ran out of the hospital and toward the transport. She could see the Marines behind her, still fighting and holding off the Kresh. Danny Cooper was at the end of the line. He walked backward and shot his rifle until it clicked empty. That's all. He yelled, I'm out. Then run, you fool. Peterson yelled back. The Marines ran to the transport. The Kresh shock troops ran after their prey when they realized they were getting away. The air was full of plasma bolts. One hit Emily so hard that she could feel the heat. Someone grabbed her by the arm and pulled her up the ramp to the bus. Garcia was it. Come on, Doc. Get in. Now the Marines were getting on the transport. 8, 9, 10. Where were the other 2? There it is. Danny Cooper and another Marine were still outside, shooting to protect everyone else. They ran away. A bolt of plasma hit the ground between them. They jumped over it and kept going. Shut the ramp. Peterson yelled. Go. 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 The engines of the transport roared to life. Danny and the other Marine were still 5 meters away when the ramp began to close. There was no way they could do it. But they did. As the ramp closed behind them, both of them dove through the gap and rolled onto the deck. The transport took off, swaying as more plasma bolts hit its shields. Emily put her face against a window and looked down. The Kresh shock troops were on the ground below, watching the transport go up into the sky. They had lost. They had lost even though they had a lot of people, armor, and a good name. As the transport went higher and higher, it shook and broke through the atmosphere. Emily let out a breath she didn't know she had been holding. They had done it. Everyone who wasn't a soldier left. All Marines are accounted for. They had really done it, even though it was very hard. She turned to look at the Marines lying on the deck, tired, hurt, but still alive. They were having a good time. For real, laughing. Like they had just won a football game instead of fighting for their lives against a top-notch alien strike force. One of the Verani civilians asked, "What the hell was that?" as they looked at the Marines in shock. Why did you? Lieutenant Peterson looked up at the alien, whose face was covered in dirt and blood but who was smiling big. "That's just how we are," he said. "You asked for help. We replied." And down below, the Kresh shock troops stood in the ruins, wondering what kind of species they had just met. What kinds of creatures would fight and die for people they didn't even know? They had just met people. And they would never forget what they had learned. The Galactic Council met again in their huge chamber 2 weeks after Varan 7 was evacuated. This time the mood was different. Tight. Powered by electricity. Everyone knew why they were there. The Kresh ambassador stood in the middle of the floor, and his huge body towered over most of the other delegates. He wore ceremonial armor that was shiny and polished and covered in medals and honors from 12 worlds he had conquered. With barely contained rage, his 4 eyes looked around the room. The Kresh ambassador started by saying, "I stand before this council to demand justice." His deep voice echoed through the translation systems. On Varan 7, the human forces did terrible things. They used too much force. They killed our soldiers without mercy. They broke every rule of civilized war. There were whispers in the room. Some of the delegates nodded in agreement. Some people looked uncomfortable. A few looked at the human section with curious expressions. The Kresh ambassador continued, his voice rising. Our shock troops were ambushed. Our forces were attacked with primitive, barbaric tactics. Buildings fell on our warriors. Improvised explosives were used against soldiers who had already surrendered. This is not how modern warfare is conducted. This is savagery. He paused for dramatic effect, letting his words sink in. The humans claimed they were protecting civilians, but their actions speak otherwise. They brought unnecessary violence to Varan 7. They made the situation worse. And now, I demand that this council hold Earth accountable for war crimes. More murmurs. This time louder. The Thorian delegate was nodding vigorously. The Pelian representative looked sympathetic. Even Delegate Vorix of the Varani looked uncertain, like he wasn't sure what to think. The Kresh ambassador pointed a clawed finger at the human section. I demand that Earth pay reparations to the Kresh Empire for the warriors killed. I demand that the Marine commanders be tried for their crimes. And I demand that humanity be sanctioned so they can never again bring such violence to the galaxy. The chamber erupted in discussion. Delegates fighting with each other. Some supporting the Kresh. Some defending humanity. It was chaos. And through it all, Ambassador James Miller sat quietly in the human section. His hands folded on the desk in front of him, his expression calm. He didn't look angry. Didn't look worried. He just waited. The council speaker, a floating jellyfish-like creature named Elder Kalos, raised several tentacles for silence. The Kresh ambassador has made serious accusations. Ambassador Miller of Earth, how do you respond to these charges? Miller got up slowly. He was old for a human, gray hair, lined face, wearing a simple dark suit with no decorations. He didn't look impressive next to the Kresh ambassador's armor and medals. But there was something about the way he stood. Something solid. Unbreakable. May I present evidence to the council? Miller asked politely. The translator for Elder Kalos made a bubbling sound. You may proceed. Miller tapped a control on his data pad. The lights in the chamber dimmed. A massive holographic display appeared above the center floor, visible to everyone. What you're about to see, Miller said quietly, is actual combat footage from Varan 7. Recorded by our Marines' helmet cameras. No editing. No messing around. Just the truth. The hologram came to life and flickered. The first picture showed a Marine named Stevens crouching behind some rubble. The Varani kids around him were crying because they were scared of the gunfire and explosions. Then the camera saw something. A Kresh plasma mortar was firing, and the projectile was flying through the air and heading straight for them. Marine Stevens saw it. He had about 2 seconds to respond. He had 2 seconds to dive for cover and save himself. Instead, he picked up the 3 Varani kids who were closest to him, wrapped his armored body around them, and turned his back to the blast. The explosion hit his armor right in the middle. It pushed him forward with its strength. There were red warnings all over his armor, showing that it was damaged. But when the smoke cleared, the Marine slowly got up and looked in on the kids. They were scared but not hurt. He had been hit by the full force of the explosion. The hologram changed to a new scene. Corporal Lisa Grant, a female Marine, was helping old Varani civilians get to the evacuation zone. It was more than 100 degrees. The heat was hard on everyone. Lisa took out her last water bottle in the video. It was clear that she was tired, thirsty, and not doing well. Anyone who was normal would drink that water. But she didn't. She opened it and carefully gave an old Varani a drink. The old alien was barely awake and wouldn't have lasted another hour in that heat. Lisa gave them everything she had. Then she put the empty bottle back on her belt and kept walking, helping the old man walk even though she could barely stand up herself. Another scene. At the northern barricade was Sergeant Mike Davis, whose name was clearly written on his armor. 2 Varani civilians had been hit by shrapnel. They were both hurt and couldn't walk. It was a full kilometer away from the evacuation zone, even though there was fighting going on. Davis didn't think twice. He picked up both civilians, one on his back and one in his arms, and began to walk. The video showed him walking through smoke and fire with plasma bolts flying past his head. He should have been going to safety. He should have been trying to save himself. He kept walking, one step at a time, even though he was carrying two people who probably weighed as much as he did. His armor systems were screaming warnings about overheating, structural stress, and power drain. He didn't pay attention to any of it and kept going until both civilians were safe in the evacuation zone. The hologram showed a lot of different scenes. Marines giving their food to hungry Varani. Marines used their own medical supplies on civilians who were hurt, even when they were hurt themselves. Marines sang songs to calm down scared kids. Marines stood guard over families sleeping all night without a break. Then the hologram showed the numbers. The important numbers. People who live in Varan 7. 3 million people left their homes. 2,847,000 civilians left. 96% of people survived. 43 Marines died in action and 217 were hurt. The room was quiet now. No sound at all. Everyone in the room was looking at those numbers. It was cold when Miller's voice broke the silence. The crash targeted civilians. Hard as steel. People who were innocent and couldn't defend themselves. They didn't come to Varan 7 to win, they came to destroy. Everyone in this room knows what the crash do to people who aren't soldiers. We have all seen it before. He stopped for a moment to let that sink in. Earth answered a call for help. We sent 600 Marines to fight 5,000 Kresh warriors and get 3 million civilians out of the area. And we did it. Yes, we did use aggressive methods. Yes, we fought hard. But everything our Marines did was to protect innocent lives. As Miller spoke, he walked slowly around the floor of the chamber and looked different delegates in the eye. The Kresh ambassador talks about crimes of war. Let me tell you about crimes. 43 young men and women died on Varan 7. They died to save people they had never met before. People from a species they had only heard about a few days before. This fight didn't matter to them personally. No land to gain. No resources to take. They went because it was the right thing to do. He stopped and turned to face the Kresh ambassador head-on. And the ambassador wants us to say sorry for that? Wants us to make amends? To save lives. The hologram changed once more. This time it showed Marine Private Danny Cooper in the field hospital. He was hurt badly but he kept fighting. Still keeping the people behind him safe. The video caught his last words before he charged a Kresh shock trooper. You want them? You have to get through me first. Miller's voice was quieter now, but it had more power. Every country in this room now knows two things about people. People will get help from us first. Second, we will do everything we can to protect those who can't protect themselves. He turned to face the whole council. The Kresh Empire has taken over 12 worlds. They've killed a lot of people. They've scared whole parts of the galaxy. And every time, species like the ones in this room have turned away. Have come up with excuses. Have chosen fairness over justice. Miller walked back to the human section but didn't sit down. Earth will never do that. We will help someone if they ask us to. Every time. And yes, we will fight like we did on Varan 7. We will be tough. We will not give up. We will use every tool and strategy at our disposal. We don't believe in half measures when lives are at stake. It was so quiet in the chamber that you could hear a pin drop. Miller leaned over the railing of the human section, and his eyes were as hard as diamonds. So, this is what I want everyone in this room to remember. The Kresh will remember what happened on Varan 7 the next time they choose a target and attack a world that can't fight back. They'll remember that people don't fight wars for land, resources, or fame. His voice got so low that it was almost a whisper, but everyone could still hear it. We fight for people. We fight for the kids who are crying in the rubble. For older people who can't run. For families who just want to live in peace. We will never ever stop fighting for them. He stood up straight. What about the Kresh's demands for reparations and trials? The answer from Earth is no. We will not say sorry for saving lives. We won't punish our Marines for doing the right thing. And we won't change the way we do things. Miller began to sit down, but then he stopped and said one more thing. But I'll tell the Kresh ambassador this. If your empire attacks another civilian population or threatens another defenseless world, Earth will be watching. If they ask for our help, we will respond the same way we did on Varan 7. Think about what that means very carefully. He took a seat. The silence in the room went on and on. It looked like Elder Kolos couldn't find the right words. The Kresh ambassador's translator unit was making clicking and stuttering sounds, as if the ambassador was too angry or shocked to speak clearly. Finally, Delegate Vorix got up. His little bug body was shaking, but not because he was scared this time. "I want to talk." Elder Kolos waved his hand to say yes. "My people owe humanity a debt we can never repay," Vorix said, his voice full of emotion. "They came when no one else would. They fought when everyone else was scared. They saved my life. They saved my family." He broke his voice. 43 people died for us. For people they didn't know. That will stay with me forever. The Varani people will always remember that. He looked at the Kresh ambassador. "I will vote against any sanctions against Earth with every vote I have." Other delegates began to speak up. The Pelians, the Thorians, even some species that had been neutral before. Things were changing. The Kresh shouldn't have brought this to the council. Instead of making people look bad, they reminded everyone of what people had done. What people were willing to do. The Kresh ambassador stood there, and his medals and armor didn't look as good all of a sudden. He thought the council would condemn Earth. They were praising them instead. He turned around and left the room without saying anything else. His translator unit was still clicking nervously. Elder Kolos watched him leave and then spoke to the council. "It looks like nothing more needs to be done about this. This meeting is over." As delegates left, a lot of them stopped by the human section to shake Miller's hand or say thank you. Miller took them with grace but not loudly. He didn't want to be praised. He had come to tell the truth. The story spread across the galaxy that night. Every network and data stream shared video from Varan 7. Animals that had never heard of Earth before were now learning about people. About the Deathworlders who fought not to take over but to keep people safe. Generals and admirals and military command centers across a dozen empires watched those videos and came to the same conclusion. They had to think about humanity now. A species that would fight anyone, anywhere to protect innocent people. The Kresh Empire also learned their lesson. After that, they never attacked another world that couldn't fight back. They knew that if they did, people might respond. And after Varan 7, no one wanted to fight. People had spoken. And the universe had heard.